As the Romans retreated from Britain, a new dynastic order rose up in what is now southern Scotland and northern England. Later known by the Welsh as Hen Ogledd, the Old North, its heroic and poetic remembrance is one of the most beautiful and often overlooked flowerings of Celtic-speaking culture. Did the people of early Wales and the North really consider Arthur to be their greatest native king? Or was a more important figure Rhiannon of Rheged? Maybe he was simply overshadowed by tales of King Arthur. Maybe Arthur was bigged up by Norman storytellers whose agenda was consolidating Britain into one homogeneous state. Honestly, we can't be sure what was intended, and anything like accurate history for this period is absent. Now there's an entire industry devoted to speculation about Arthur, Merlin, and the so-called Dark Ages in Britain. They say the winner gets to write the history. History is what we lack here, but it's true that the literary accounts of the Norman storytellers have received a lot more attention than those of native storytellers and poets. Part of the problem is linguistic. The Latin, French, and English of the Norman tradition has been more widely translated than texts in Middle Welsh until the past few decades. Now that good translations have emerged, I think it's important to hear the words of native Britons, whose bards were trained to preserve lore over many centuries. The stories they tell offer a very different perspective. Even in translation, the poetry with which they tell their stories remains beautiful and moving. If you're open to it, I think it conveys something just as important as when kings reigned or the location of battles. In this series of classes, we'll explore these tales and how they might reflect more history than you'd expect. This is a story which often puts Rhiannon at the center, one in which we find many of his kin and associates being rewritten by the Norman tradition as Arthur's knights and ladies. As well as Rhiannon, we'll consider Welsh literature about his son Owain, we'll talk about Taliesin and Myrddin, and meet the tragic warriors of the Gododdin. We'll bump into a few Christian saints and native deities along the way. If you share my enthusiasm for these topics, I hope you'll join us. Today is the 10th day of the 12 Days of Celtic Mythology, Season 4. It's also the last day of 2025, so have a good new year when it comes to you, wherever you are. I'll be seeing the year in with a dram while working on our final 2 episodes. I'll be reading your comments, as usual, and deciding who's been naughty or nice, I guess. So the people who are left in the running are pretty tenacious. As near as I can tell, a lot of them are my students already. I can't always tell from the usernames. But I'm determined to get some new people hooked on my live classes. So I want to give classes to other people too. So hang on tight if you want a class and keep in the challenge. Have you been looking at my list of classes, thinking about which ones you'll choose if you complete the challenge? So there are 2 places that you can do that. The classes that are coming up soon are listed on Ticket Tailor, and the registration is open for those classes if you're not doing the challenge. You can find quite detailed descriptions of those classes on Ticket Tailor. People who aren't doing the challenge are already signing up for classes on there. So the only one with limited places is the storytelling class. There's still room on that right now, but I imagine it'll start filling up. There's also a page on my website where you can see all the classes I'm planning to teach this year with short descriptions. And that link is always in that first comment under the videos. It's like the last link. So yesterday I told you the 2 versions of the conception of Cuchulainn. The second one in particular, one with the foals born in the doorway, is the one I often discuss with students who take my Celtic Horse Goddesses class, which happens toward the end of every year, so it's just happened recently. I love the stuff about Cuchulainn's horses because it's kind of mysterious. None of the recensions of the Táin ever really explain it fully. So for anyone who missed yesterday or who was drowning in a sea of stories and doesn't quite remember, according to the second version I shared, at the moment Cuchulainn is born, a mare comes and stands in the doorway of the house and gives birth to two foals. Now, things happening in doorways, half in and half out of a house, so to speak, is often a signal that something supernatural is taking place. A doorway is a liminal space, neither one thing or the other. I talked more about liminal space in episode 10 of season 1, if you'd like to check it out. Yesterday's story states that it was decided to give the foals to the boy, to the newborn Cuchulainn. But we never hear about them again. There's more strange doings concerning Cuchulainn's birth and infancy, but no mention of the foals. But hidden away in one of the texts of Bricri's feast in the Ulster cycle is this little snippet. Cuchulainn has just entered the house where he's staying and states that he's too tired to eat because he's had a hard day. And we'll just pick the text up there. So all of this was in fact true by reason of Cuchulainn's encounter that day with the Lia Mache by the shores of Lindley. So that's a lake. The horse had come toward him from the lake. Cuchulainn had put his arms around its neck, and the two of them had circled all Eru until at last night fell and the horse was broken. Cuchulainn found the dove Sanglin in the same way in the Loch Duibh Sanglin. So we've got two horses here who come out of lakes to Cuchulainn. It's not stated outright that these two mysterious horses who come out of these lakes are the two foals, but it rather seems like they might be. And one of them is called the Grey of Mache, which is interesting too. These horses become Cuchulainn's chariot horses, and they play an important role in the story of his death. And they both return to their respective lakes during that episode. But let me tell you a story now. You may have heard something about Rhiannon. Her husband-to-be, Puich, the ruler of the Welsh kingdom called Dyfed, first saw her come riding through his kingdom on a beautiful white horse. She was obviously otherworldly, and it turned out that she had come seeking him because she wanted him for her husband. Getting married turned out to be less straightforward than they'd hoped. All of this is told in the first branch of the Mabinogi. But anyway, they finally made it. They got married and they ruled Dyfed. After they'd been married for several years, Rhiannon finally gave birth to a son. On the night he was born, 6 waiting women were sent for to sit up and watch over Rhiannon and her sleeping child. But as the night passed, one by one the women all fell asleep, and they didn't wake up until dawn. To their horror, the child was nowhere to be found. And Rhiannon, very tired from giving birth, was still asleep. Well, the women began to panic, and one said, oh, they're in danger of being put to death for allowing the child to go missing, and unable to find him, they tried to think of some way to hide their guilt. Now, there was a staghound sleeping nearby with her pups. So this is what they did. They killed one of the puppies, and they smeared the face and the hands of the sleeping Rhiannon with its blood, and scattered a few of its bones near her, and waited for her to wake up. Of course, when she woke up, she called for her son, but the women swore that Rhiannon had awakened in the night, and in a fit of madness had killed and eaten her son. They said that they had struggled to stop her, but she had been too strong for them. Well, Rhiannon knew this wasn't so, and she promised them that she would protect them from punishment if they would only tell her the truth. But they stuck to their story. Word of these events spread like wildfire through the kingdom. Puig's nobles petitioned him to cast Rhiannon aside for her terrible crime. He refused, but to placate them, he did agree that she must be punished. And this was the punishment that was decided upon. She must sit every day beside the horse-mounting block at the castle gates, and tell everyone who arrived what crime she was accused of, and then she must offer to carry them on her back up the hill to the castle. and this was to be her punishment for 7 years. But now our story turns aside to another matter. At that time there was a lord who ruled in nearby Gwentiscoed, and he was called Ternon Turfliant, and you would not find a better man than Ternon anywhere in the world. Ternon had a beautiful mare also. She was better than any other horse in his kingdom. Every May Eve, this mare would give birth to a foal, but by May morning, the foal would be missing and no one knew what had become of them. Finally, Ternon said to his wife, "Wife, we have been careless, letting the mare lose her foal every year. Tonight is May Eve, and God's vengeance on me if I don't discover what happens to these foals." So Ternon had the mare brought into the house, and he armed himself, and he began to keep watch. So the mare gave birth to a big, beautiful foal, and almost immediately it got to its feet, and Ternon went to look at it more closely. Just then he heard a terrible commotion outside, and then an enormous claw reached in through the window and grabbed the poor wee foal by its mane as if to take it. Well, Ternon drew his sword and he cut that terrible arm off at the elbow so that it fell to the ground, leaving the foal safely inside. Whew. Now there was a scream and more commotion outside, so Ternon rushed out expecting to see some terrible monster. The night was dark and there was nothing to be seen. Soon Ternon remembered that he had left the door open, so he went back, and there, in the doorway, he found a baby wrapped in a sheet of brocaded silk. He picked him up, and he noticed that the child was strong for his age. Ternon barred the door then and took the child to the bedchamber where his wife was asleep. None of this had awakened her. "Are you asleep, wife?" he said. "Not any more," she replied. "I've brought you a child," said Ternon, "if you want him, since you've never had one of your own." "My lord," she replied, "what's the story behind this?" So Ternon told her what had happened. Well, they could see by the fine cloth he was wrapped in that the boy belonged to a noble family. Ternon's wife said that it would give her great pleasure and comfort to care for him as if he was her own. They decided to tell everyone that the boy was their child, and they named him Guri Goldenhair. So the boy was reared in Ternon's court, and by the time he was a year old, he was as big and strong as a child of 3. And so it went until by 4 years of age, he was a well-grown lad. He loved nothing more than to bribe the stable boys to allow him to take the horses to the river for their daily drink. And Ternon's wife said to him, "Lord, what became of the foal that was born on that May Eve when the boy came to us?" "Oh, the stable boys have been looking after it all this time," he replied. "Do you not think, husband, that it would be good to have the horse trained and given to the boy?" she said, "since they both came to us on the same night?" "Oh, I agree with you," said Ternon, "and I think you should present the horse to him yourself." What a nice old couple they are. So the horse was given to Guri. Ternon's lady went to the stable boys and told them to train it carefully and to bring her news of its progress so that it would be ready for the time when the boy would ride it. But in the meantime, word came to Ternon of Rhiannon and her punishment, and many people spoke to Ternon about how wretched her situation was. Ternon began to think about this, and he began to look at the boy Guri, and he realized that he had never seen a lad who looked more like his father. And for Ternon had known Puig when he was younger. Now he was troubled, because it was wrong of him to keep the lad when he was another man's son. So Ternon spoke gently to his wife. He asked her whether it was right for them to keep the boy, when Rhiannon was under punishment for his disappearance, and the lad was the son of Puig. Of course she agreed that the boy must be returned. She said to Ternon, "Lord, 3 gifts will we get for our honesty. Rhiannon's thanks for freeing her from her punishment, the gratitude of Puig for raising his son, and third, when the lad becomes a nobleman, he will always help us because he is our foster son." So the following day, Ternon made ready to set out for Puig's court at Arbert. He took 2 men with him, and the boy rode the young horse which had been born on May Eve. They soon arrived at Pwyll's gates, and they could see Rhiannon sitting beside the mounting block. As they approached her, she spoke to them. "Go no further. I will carry every one of you up to the court, for this is my punishment for killing my own son." "Lady," said Ternon, "not a one of us will allow you to carry us." And the boy added, "Even if the others were to be carried by you, I would not allow you to carry me." Well, they went up to the court, and they saw that a feast had been prepared. Pwyll had just returned from his circuit of the kingdom. They were welcomed and washed. Pwyll welcomed Ternon, and they all sat down to eat. Ternon was seated between Pwyll and Rhiannon, and the boy sat between Ternon's 2 men, all at the top of the table. Then everyone had eaten their fill, and they began to drink and talk. And then Ternon told the story of how his mare had foaled one May Eve, and how the boy came to be in his household and raised by his wife and himself. "Behold, this is your son, my lady," Ternon said to Rhiannon, "and whoever brought your troubles about did you a terrible wrong. When I heard of your misery, I felt great sadness, and I'm sure that everyone who looks on this boy will agree that he must be the son of Pwyll." Everyone agreed with that, and Rhiannon said, "If that is true, then I am delivered from my worries." And since the word she spoke was Pryderi, which means worry, that became the boy's name, and after that he was called Pryderi. Pwyll thanked Ternon for raising the lad and promised that he would be repaid for all he had done. And Ternon replied, "Don't forget my wife, who loved him and cared for him. No one will miss him more than she will." So there are many parallels between the story of Rhiannon and that of Macha, who runs a race against the horses and curses the Ulsterman for her trouble in the Ulster cycle. And there are some parallels between this birth story of Pryderi and the story of Cuchulain's birth. We talk about all of this in more depth in that Celtic horse goddesses class I mentioned, and there are some videos about it here on my channel too. My question for you today is what parallels you noticed between the 2 birth stories. You should be able to find 2 just in today's video. So have a great Hogmanay and a happy new year when it comes. I'll see you in 2026.